When we look forward now, the challenges are there again. There's challenges around greenhouse gases, there's challenges around water quality, there's challenges around dairy beef integration, there's challenges around biodiversity, beef. But those challenges will be met once we approach it in the same way as dairy expansion was approached, and the industry working together to meet all of those challenges.
Hello, I'm Stuart Childs and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With the Moorepark Open Day taking place on the 4th of July, starting at 8:30am, I thought it would be appropriate to talk to Laurence Shalloo, the head of the Animal and Grassland Research and Innovation Programme at Moorepark, to discuss the challenges the industry now faces, with some of the solutions to many of these challenges being showcased at the Open Day. But I started by asking Laurence to cast his mind back, to think about the challenges the industry faced in the past and how it dealt with it.
I suppose, you're right. The point is, to look at the challenges that we face into the future and opportunities. It shouldn't always be about challenges, but when we look into the future, it's no harm to stand back and look into the past. So, when I think about this stuff and I think about, where the industry was in 07 to 09, the signal had just come that milk quotas were going to be removed. There was a relaxation of the milk quota process, and there was, the EU Commission said they wanted to see milk production move to areas of competitive advantage. At that point, you think about it, there was an appetite. We knew that farmers had an appetite for expansion. What we didn't know, though, is how we'd process that milk, how we'd fund the expansion process, how we'd sell the product, or who would sell the product. Would there be a market for the product? And there was a lot of debate about that. And how we'd produce the milk. There was a lot of debate about whether we should flatten the milk curve and go split calving and have two calving patterns. And all of those issues were dealt with by the industry working together. It was, the industry working through the, policy of Food Harvest 2020. But all of that together resulted in, an industry that worked together around, expansion at farm level happened. It was a 50% target by 2020. We're at, in terms of solids now, we're at 96% relative to 07-09 at the end of 2022. There was, in terms of the processing capacity was built, and the curve remained the way it was. And the markets were got. And you stand back and you look at the success stories about the Kerrygold brand, and you look about the story about Irish butter in the US, and it's you have the likes of really the Kardashians or Oprah Winfrey, who are essentially talking about Irish butter in unpaid scenarios. So these are really there were big challenges at the time, and they were all addressed by the industry working together and I suppose dealing with the challenges as they came. When we look forward now, the challenges are there again. There's challenges around greenhouse gases, there's challenges around water quality, there's challenges around dairy beef integration, there's challenges around biodiversity, beef. But those challenges will be met once we approach it in the same way as dairy expansion was approached, and the industry working together to meet all of those challenges.
Okay, so Laurence, when I listen to what you said there now, you actually have kind of nearly pinched yourself to realise that there were challenges that we kind of, like you said, the industry just came together and went about it and sorted this problem. The only thing I'll say to you is that everybody in the industry was pushing in a particular direction at that time. There's a bit of muddying of the waters going on, pardon the pun now when we talk about the water piece in a minute, but there's a bit of, maybe the advancements in social media and so forth has seen things change a little bit. The dynamic in, there's a lot of people in the industry pushing in a particular direction, but there's a lot of people pushing against the industry as well. So do you think that we can still kind of get everybody on side to try to do exactly as you've explained as what we did in the last decade, where we got everybody put their shoulder to the wheel and pushed in the same direction and we got the solutions?
And Stuart, if you go back again and look back at there was lots of conflicting views at the time, whether we should be flattening the curve, whether there was issues around contracts in terms of when milk quotas were removed. There was lots of challenges then, and there was lots of conflicting views then, and every one of those conflicting views and challenges were met by the industry working together. In terms of What I think you're getting at is the noise, and I call it noise outside the industry. And to be honest, once the industry is led by science and driven by science in terms of the challenges and the solutions, then that noise will be there and it'll be fine. But for me, once we keep science at the middle, the start, middle, and end, then I wouldn't overly worry about that noise in the background, because ultimately, we can see that in terms of the science and the numbers, that will ultimately win out. An example for me is there was lots of discussion in the last few years about sourcing food from animal source food versus plant source food. And the more information we see in terms of an FAO report that came out in the last couple of months, and the health benefits, etc., all of that, once the science gets out there and the numbers are solid, then that'll win over at the end of the day.
So basically what you're saying is, I know Joe often says this now, Joe Patton, that not everybody is on Twitter, and that if people pick up the negativity that's coming from that, maybe they can get buried in the whole thing. But in reality, not everybody's thinking that way, and that there is a very positive message for the industry to tell, and it's just about getting everybody in the room, sit down together and decide on the plan basically and deliver that plan.
Absolutely. And as we all know, like anyone that's and I'm not on Twitter, so maybe it's easy for me to say that, but everyone that's on Twitter is an expert, and you all have your own opinion. But again, once we stick to the scientific, the numbers, the peer review, then we get over a lot of that kind of chatter and noise that's there in the background.
Yeah, so it was there always, but it's just maybe got a bigger forum to work in current times. So look, I suppose there's a couple of things that we probably do need to deal with. I was speaking actually to a Dutch group yesterday, and they were very surprised at the cost of production in Ireland. They always felt that it was, obviously they were thinking back prior to last year when costs obviously crept up quite a lot, and they're looking like they're going to stay in or around that 35, 36 maybe cent a litre type scenario. That's a major challenge for the industry, Laurence. Like, it was grand, it worked out okay last year. This year's a very different ball game. Again, talking to some of the co-ops there in the last few days, there's a suggestion that there could be a further correction in price coming, and obviously solids are rising maybe as the year goes on, so that kind of masks it a little. But the margin is definitely going to change dramatically from the big figure that was announced by the NFS the other day. So what do you see as been the challenges with the competitive side of the dairy farming? You said it there that it was seen a couple of years ago that it was important that we moved the production to the area where it was most competitive. Are we losing our competitiveness a small bit?
There's no doubt that 2022 was a massive challenge, and it has spilled into 2023 in terms of cost of production. So, like, if we look at the ballpark numbers, cost of production were up somewhere of the order of 30%. So they were ballpark running at 25 cent a litre, not including a return for owned land and labour. And if you wanted to include a return for owned land and labour, you'd probably add 10 cent a litre onto that. So that's where they were running in 2021, and with 2021 was a slight increase. And in 2022, we know they're up at 35 cent, and they look like they're going to be robustly sticky in 2023. So that's a real challenge. And for me, it's probably the most serious challenge. And there needs to be an urgent focus at farm level of taking out costs. Whatever happens at processor level, and it's absolutely the right thing to do to argue and look for higher milk prices. And that should happen. But at farm level, we should all, look at what can be done to take out costs out of the system. And I suppose, you look at some of the increases that have happened in costs. Feed and forage costs increased by something like 78% in 2022, which is a huge cost. And concentrate costs increased by 33%. So what can we do to take some of those costs out of the system? And that's the big challenge. So fertilizer cost price, as we know, is coming down, so that's a positive. But can we take the focus and put more focus on things like clover? And it looks like it's going to be a good year for clover. From what I've seen in the last couple of weeks, as the rain has started to come again, clover seems to be really taking off. So can we put a strong emphasis on clover at farm level? All our data shows us that we get increased milk yield per cow. And we take costs out of the system. If our analysis from last year shows that a clover system will increase profitability by 400 to 500 euros a hectare. So can we put more emphasis on clover? The second one then is feeding. So we fed about 1.2 tons of concentrate in 2022 on average, or the industry fed 1.2 tons. So for me, the big question is, what can we do to take that cost at ballpark 420, 430 euros a ton? That could come very close to 10 cent a litre in terms of the cost of production. So that's completely not sustainable. So can we take feed out of the system? Yeah, it'll mean that you probably reduce milk output, but from a profitability point of view, all our data tells us that when there's adequate grass in the system, so when there is enough grass in the system, the economic response to additional concentrate is negative, and especially when we talk about a concentrate cost of maybe 400 euros plus a ton, and milk price heading under that number. So it is certainly a question that we need to look at. And I'd be talking for individual farmers. Every farmer will have different strategies to take costs out of the system, but unless you start looking at your numbers, and unless you start putting a plan in place, it's impossible to take costs out of systems. You can talk about it, but unless you start looking at your numbers and identifying where the areas are, then it's very difficult to take costs out of the system. But you're right, Stuart. 35 cent a litre, as we're at now and are projected to be for 2023, is not sustainable in terms of our competitive or comparative advantage. The only thing or comparative advantage we have in this country in terms of cost of production are our focus on grass. So we need to double down on that focus and ensure that we're maximising our potential from that grass.
So you mentioned a very important word in that answer there now, Laurence, adequate in terms of grass availability. Have we slipped a small little bit in terms of, I suppose, grass growth, or actually the amount of cows that we're trying to feed with what grass we're growing, if you know what I mean?
So yeah, and it's a very good question. We probably are after 2022 was a challenging enough year from a grass growth point of view. We all remember 2018. We had a tough few weeks just gone by. So the question is, and I think what you're getting at here is the stocking rates that we're operating our platforms at too high? And I think it's a question that every farmer needs to be asking themselves. I suppose to understand what your appropriate number of cows are for your platform, you need to, I suppose, experience those numbers. And for the last couple of years, that experience maybe hasn't been a useful one or a positive one for some. So I think it's certainly one, Stuart, that we need to start looking at. Are we driving the milking platforms too strong? And what are the implications for that in terms of the cost of production, the feed that's been brought into the system, but also, we're going to talk a little bit in a second about water quality and challenges around greenhouse gases. Are those stocking rates on the platform putting us under bigger pressure than we need to be at an overall system level? And that's a question that I think needs to be looked at from all farmers' point of view.
Yeah, okay. So you mentioned them there now, I've heard one of the co-op people mention this as the knot nearest the throat is the water quality issue. So basically we're under severe pressure, as everybody should be well aware at this stage, to retain our derogation and to hold the 250 where it is. Now you've been a strong advocate for holding that 250 where it is. So what's your rationale for that for that angle that you're taking? You probably almost could be nearly have been described at one point as being the only person in the industry for a small period there that was trying to hold the line, but you've managed to get a band of people behind you now, I think, as well.
Yeah, so basically I suppose we did a piece of work, a modelling piece of work in the last 6 months, based on a request from DAFM to look at, and we looked at stocking rate, and we looked at fertilizer levels, and we looked at some of the changes or all of the changes that are included in the Nitrates Action Programme 5, so the ones that were implemented last year. So that's on our website, so it's available for anyone to look at and download. But what we did was we modeled all of the changes that had been implemented, right? And we weren't, certain on the modeling approaches we were using, so we used two separate models. When we did that, one model said that the nitrate loss that's going to be saved was somewhere around 12%, and the other model said the savings were going to be 19%, right? So they are, from the introduction of banding, and banding is something that hasn't been, I suppose, welcomed with open arms by a lot of farmers. But in reality, when we stand back and look at the numbers, we were dealing with an organic N of 85, and that was there since 1994. To be honest, when DAFM asked us to calculate what the organic N should be, we had no idea where that 85 came from. So that was the first piece of work DAFM asked us to do, and that meant when we did that, when we looked at it, organic N had increased dramatically and was up at somewhere around 94 or 95 in 2021. But then DAFM asked us to develop a banding system, and again, what does that banding do? It links nitrate loss. It links nitrogen output at a cow level, right? So what it's doing is it's relating. If you have a higher milk yield cow, she's producing more, she's eating more, there's more nitrogen coming out of the system, and that's all that banding does. It reflects that set of numbers. That, coupled with reduced chemical nitrogen, coupled with increased earlier slurry spreading and more soil water storage, and later spring nitrogen spreading. So when we model all that together, that's the saving, somewhere between 12 and 19%. So then we were also asked to look at going to 220. So we weren't asked, and Stuart, you mentioned a point about the derogation going. Just to be crystal clear, we were never asked to model a derogation going. So I think, and maybe I'm being, wrong here, but that was something that hasn't been looked at, from any analysis point of view. When we look at reducing from 250 to 220, yes, there is further nitrate leaching saving, but it's small relative to the costs. So when we look at the overall numbers, reducing nitrate leaching is saving roughly about 3% more by going to 220. But the implications from a profitability point of view are very strong. So just to put it in perspective, what that analysis showed was a 30% introduction of banding for a farmer that's in band 3 and going to 220 would reduce profitability by up to 30% on farm, which is huge for a dairy farm. And it's something that we need to be really clear on in terms of the implications. And from what we know now is a relatively small effect on nitrate leaching. That's one point. The second point then is when we look at the catchments, the ACPs that are run by Teagasc, the ACP catchments, what we can see here is that in essence, and we look at the Timoleague in particular because that's a catchment is that has derogation. We can see that from 2010 to 2022, there's probably no change in water quality, even though the organic N per hectare has gone from 130 to over 180. So in that time period, we've had a fairly dramatic increase in stocking rate, but no change in water quality. And that's a really, really, really positive. Now, does that mean the water quality is perfect in the Timoleague catchment? No, and it means that there's further work to be done. But what we can say here is that the increase in stocking rate didn't result in an increase in nitrate in the water.
Okay, so, and like the same thing, I suppose, are we an easy target in that sense? And I suppose the same question applies to the greenhouse gas emissions piece. Like, I mean, there's greenhouse gas emissions from everything that's going on around the world, but agriculture just seems to be having the finger of blame pointed at it the whole time. Is it just because there's a lot of farmers out there and they can't all be unified together as such? I suppose, look, that's the role of the farmer organisations to try to kick back there, but the people are taking a bit of a kicking, and this is the biggest problem I see with it. The morale is low because people are just like, what's this all for? What's the direction? It's very hard to plan a future currently in farming the way things keep changing and stuff. So what's your take on that side of the greenhouse gas emissions and the finger of blame piece as well, I suppose?
No, it is. You're right. And you mentioned chatter and noise in the background, and that can be quite damaging for farmers in terms of the investment piece. If you want farmers to invest in technologies to reduce the lost pathways, well then, if there's chatter in the background saying that there's change is going to come in stocking rate restrictions, well, that farmer is not going to be encouraged to invest. So that is a bit of a problem. But I suppose for me, I take positive. Again, I go back to the numbers and go back to the science. The most recent EPA report that came out in the last week in terms of the 2022 numbers, to be honest, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, Right. You read the headline in that, and it says that there's no change in water quality, and that's a big problem. But when you actually dig into the numbers and you dig into this report, I think there's some really nice positives. It's not perfect. There is substantial improvement still needed, but I still think there's a lot of positives in this report that we can look at. And for me, looking at this report, there is something that I think we can be. I think we can be quite positive that there is change happening, and that change is starting to work out in the numbers. For example, if we look at the water quality and look at high and good, which is where we want all water quality to be, there's no change in terms of that in the last three reports. So 16 to 18, 19 to 21, and 19 to 22. So there's no change in high and good there, right? They're all at 56%, and we need that to increase, right? So that's clear. But when we look within it, high is increasing. So high was 15% in 16 to 18, 16% in the 19 to 21, and 17% in the 19 to 22. So that is increasing. In terms of bad, so it was about 4.5% when we go back to the initial 87 to 90 period that were bad or classified as bad. And in 19 to 22, there's only 2, and none of those, from my reading of the report, none of those are, related to agriculture. If we look at the overall numbers for 2022, 84 rivers improved in water quality, 77 declined, so more improved than disimproved. If we look at the high quality, the high status, basically what that shows is that there is an increase in the high quality status, and in the 2019 to 22 there was 1.2% in the high quality status, up from 1%. It was the highest in a decade essentially, so that looks like it's going the right direction. If you look at in terms of river nitrate concentration, in the 18 to 2020 period there was 36% in the high status. In the 19 to 21 period, it was 39%. And in the 2020 to 22 period, that was up to 41%. So that's increasing all the time. Again, a positive. If we look at high and good together, in the 18 to 2020 period, there was 53%. In the 19 to 21, there was 57%. And the 2020 to 2022, there was 60%. So again, all go in the right direction. Are they going as fast as we want? Are they as high as we want? Absolutely not. But they are going in the right direction, and again, it's important to draw out those positives. And I suppose it's also important to draw out, there was an increase in the nitrate concentration in the river, so that's something that we need to work on. And most of that increase was in the south east region and the Midlands and eastern region together. The final thing that I thought was quite positive in this report is the estuaries, and essentially what the estuaries data is telling us is I think about 80% of the estuaries were in good, what we want them to be, and that was at 75% a few years ago. So again, improvement. So what is that conclusion? Does it mean that we are where we want to be? No, but it does say that we are going the right direction. And it's important that we dig into these reports and pull out this information, because it's generally all in the reports.
Yeah, so it's not really helpful then, Laurence, that whoever's interpreting that report is given the message that agriculture is fully to blame for all of this, because everything you said there would contradict what was mentioned in the media last week.
And again, that's why I think it's important that farmers download. These are excellent reports from the EPA, and I think it's important that farmers look at these reports and go through them. They're very simple and they're easy to look at, and farmers, should be informing themselves of what the numbers are in these reports.
That's the water. I won't say it's dealt with, but we're working on it. And as you've outlined there, the progress is in the right direction, which is important.
It's important to note, so Stuart, it's not there. It's
a lot done more to do, to paraphrase a former great party. Huh? The greenhouse gas emissions piece then is the other elephant in the room, I suppose. And again, a lot of uncertainty for farmers. And you've nailed it on the head there straight away. Very, very hard for farmers. Like we talk about adequate slurry storage and all of these, and farms maybe expanding and trying to match their storage requirements and so forth, and a bit kind of taking a punt in essence at the moment to actually go building anything, because you might be putting up storage for stock you won't have in 2 years' time, the way things are being spoken about. Again, maybe just the nature of the media in the present day making that seem like a reality, but there's a lot of positive scope for the industry to achieve the targets or to go in the right direction? Okay, we need some new technologies maybe, and you're working on them, I suppose, and that's more of a reason for people to come on the 4th of July to see what is being done here. A huge amount of work going on. But what's your take on the GHG piece, we'll say, and how it's going to influence the industry?
Yeah, and again, we have a target, our agriculture has a target to reduce emissions by 25% by 2030 relative to 2018. And obviously that is a lower target than other sectors, because the whole of society has a target to reduce emissions by 51%. But I suppose it is important to say at the outset here, Stuart, that it is, climate change, from what we're looking at, from the data, appears to be real. It is real, and it is something that we need to take serious. And agriculture must and should play its part in terms of reducing emissions. So in terms of 25% reduction target, yeah, it's going to be a real challenge. And I suppose for me, I'm breaking it into two things. First, breaking into the technologies that we have today to implement at farm level, and then take a little look at the technologies that we're looking at for the future and things that are showing significant promise. So the things that we can do today at farm level, like what we know now is increasing EBI will reduce greenhouse gases. We know that reducing the age at slaughter will reduce greenhouse gases. We know that increasing soil fertility and introducing clover and replacing chemical nitrogen will reduce greenhouse gases. We know that using protected urea will reduce greenhouse gases. We know that drainage of mineral soils will help reduce greenhouse gases. So there's lots of things we know and can be implementing fairly rapidly now at farm level, and that's part of the puzzle for me, for farmers today. That's what their part of the bargain will say is those technologies should be taken on as soon as possible. Most of them will result in an increase in profitability, or definitely not a deterioration in profit. So that's the first step. And then there's the technologies that we're looking at for the future, and there's lots and lots of those, and there's lots of work going on, and there's huge investment, and that investment is getting bigger all the time in terms of new technologies, whether that's on looking at different types of genetics and its impact on methane emission factors, whether it's around looking at fertilizer emission factors, whether it's around looking at land use emission factors, whether it's around looking at feed additives. There's a huge amount of work going on. So I'm very positive about what can be done as we go into the future, and what's possible as we go into the future. So that's your 25% target. Can it be achieved? At the end of the day, I suppose it very much depends on technology take up at farm level, and getting on the road to be coming close to those targets. I suppose, in a positive sense, it is hoped and expected that agriculture will have reduced its emissions in 2022. Those numbers will come out from the EPA probably in July this year. But the expectation is that those numbers, those total greenhouse gases, will reduce. And I suppose we need momentum to start, and we need to continue that momentum. So that is something that's positive. I suppose then, if we look at the carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of Irish dairy and beef is really low. So the carbon footprint of milk that we've just updated now again, based on 22 data, is somewhere around 0.93 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of fat and protein corrected milk. When we add in the most recent emission factor work that we have done, that's under peer review, and let's assume that gets published, that brings that figure to 0.86. So just to be clear, that's not including sequestration. That puts us in a really strong place, or puts the industry in a really strong place as it looks out into the marketplace. And that's something we need to build on, and we need to drop that even further, so that from a marketing point of view, that Irish product is seen as the lowest carbon footprint in the world. And I've every expectation, hope, and desire that achieves that level, because I think it can be done.
Yeah, I suppose, Laurence, correct me if I'm wrong now, I have a feeling that there was a figure of 1.08 there at one stage a number of years ago. So, and that has changed by virtue of the research work that you've been doing in the last few years, and modifying and correcting those factors that were being used. We'll say international factors were being assumed there. So the work that has been done so far has delivered nearly 0.2 or 0.25 almost, or something. As I said, I'm open to correction on that figure, but So huge leap forward in that sense.
Yeah, and I think there's a number going back not so long ago that's closer to 1.2. So like there's a combination of things happening here. There's progress at farm level in terms of productivity, etc. But there's also new emission factors, as you said, and I suppose it's important that those new emission factors, they're not emissions reductions. They're I suppose they're rebaselining or more clarity around the science. And it's a combination of those two approaches that's bringing us to where we are today at that 0.86, 0.87. But again, that's massive, because when you look at the international markets, you look at what's out there in terms of carbon footprint, the international default value for emissions of milk is somewhere around 2.4 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of fat and protein corrected milk. And to be crystal clear, that 0.86 is not the end point. Our data and our modeling tells us that can be brought down to maybe under 0.7, again excluding sequestration. So there's huge potential to go further, and that should be the ambition of every dairy farmer, to have the lowest carbon footprint milk in the world, so that we are in a really strong, or the industry is in a really strong place at a market level, as well as an overall emissions point of view from a country perspective.
Okay, so last point, Laurence, I suppose I know this is something that you're passionate about, is the whole of what we've discussed in the last 20 minutes or 25 minutes will go for naught if there aren't people in the industry. So I suppose some of what we have discussed has been contributing to it, in that the negativity around the industry is probably a little bit off-putting for people. But what can we do in the realm of getting people into dairying? Now, we've been very successful with the expansion phase, and the abolition of the quota obviously realised a lot of people's ambitions to start milking cows and so forth, and maybe running farms and all that. It's a big challenge across every sector. That's the important thing to point out, I suppose. But people are finding it hard to get help at every level, really. Like whether it's milking the cows or getting somebody contractors getting somebody to do slurry, that kind of stuff. What do you see as being the future for the industry in that sense?
You're 100% right, Stuart, and I actually think that this is the biggest challenge that's in the industry today. We've talked a lot about other stuff there, but I think this is probably the biggest challenge that's out there. And let's be crystal clear, we're in a society that's at full employment, which is really positive and something that's really good for society. So the question is, how do we, ensure that the industry has, people within it? And part of that is generational renewal. Part of it is bringing people into the industry as a career choice. And to be honest, that's one of the major focuses for us on the Open Day, because we have a forum on it. For me, it's about two things. It's about supply and it's about demand. So demand, how can we reduce the amount of labour that we need to run the farm? And that's really about practice. It's really about how we do things on the farm. It's really about investing in technologies, smart technologies that will help us reduce labour on the farm. So that's reducing the demand side. But also we need to be working on the supply side. So how do we get more people in? And I think we need to be really innovative about this. For example, we have a student on the forum at the Open Day talking about how she's using milking cows essentially to help her get through college, the same as we all worked on at something when we were in college. And it's hugely positive, because it allows her still get to the football match. It allows her still work as a social life, to have to go out at night. And I think she says that once she can get up for a few hours at 6 o'clock in the morning, milk the cows, she can go back to bed again. So we have to be, I suppose, looking at all of the opportunities. And sometimes I don't think we sell ourselves very well in terms of the opportunities that are on dairy farms, whether it's just to milk cows or whether it's whatever. So I think the People in Dairy initiative was launched in 2017, and it's something that I think we need to work much harder on to, I suppose, to show the opportunities that are in the industry, to show whether that's a seasonal work to get to short term, or whether it's long term careers, because there is huge opportunities for all types of people within the industry. And I think it's important that that's seen and recognized, and that the opportunities are visible, because sometimes a farm is not seen as a place that has employing people, and that's something that we need to, I suppose, change, and we need to, I suppose, put out there that there are business models and opportunities on dairy farms.
Okay, very good. So I suppose, Laurence, just to wrap it up, from what I can take from what you're saying there, you're basically a call to arms for farmers to come along to the open day on the 4th of July, see the technologies that they may already be familiar with in some cases, but also see some of the newer technologies that are potentially coming on stream, and you're challenging them to pick them up and run with them as fast as they can out of Moorepark on that day and implement them at home in order to start delivering on the targets that we've been set, and that if we do that, we can achieve what's been set out for us. That's
it, Stuart, and I suppose just, it's 8:30 on the 4th is the kickoff, and all are welcome. It's free, and it's very much for me a communication day. It's a day where we'll talk, but we want to listen as well. It's not about lectures from the mount. We want to hear as well. So we very much enjoy or want engagement on the day.
Very good, Laurence. Thanks very much for joining me today, and the best of luck on the 4th of July.
Thanks, Stuart.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Age podcast, and my thanks to Laurence Shalloo for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join me next time for your Dairy Age.